Ladies and gentlemen, last week I shared a fantastic and fascinating story, if I may say so myself, about Bernstein almost finding whole beat as a solution.
Do you suppose he just might have first thought of this music as a minuet in a normal minuet tempo?
If you haven't seen the video, what are you doing with your life? What is more important on this planet right now? We're talking here about Beethoven's tempi, right? All jokes apart, I haven't made a video in the past, I think, where I was so much misunderstood as in this one. The main point was simply this: Bernstein was conflicted with the tempo indication, both the Italian tempo word and the metronome mark that Beethoven gave for the minuet of his first symphony. And in trying to find a solution, he ended up by talking about Beethoven as a revolutionary composer, which Beethoven was in a sense, but maybe not in this minuet. It was not the point. In trying to find a solution, he also demonstrated the minuet in a whole beat tempo as the normal minuet tempo.
Let's see what it might have sounded like, if so.
And just seeing him almost by instinct, playing a piece of music in a symphony of Beethoven of all pieces, instinctively in whole beat, that was the whole point of the video. It means that when you just think outside the box, these whole beat tempi are not so far away from what we still feel today, what we can still discover by instinct. I don't think Bernstein looked at the metronome mark and half that. No, he just demonstrated something that in his mind was the normal, traditional minuet tempo that you were supposed to take here in this movement if Beethoven didn't give this Allegro, molto or vivace and his metronome mark. Again, that was the entire point of the video. But the discussion very quickly in the comment box went like, yeah, but Wim, haven't you seen the Allegro, molto e vivace? And the minuet in this symphony was maybe already a scherzo. And I took some time to answer some comments, but it was like hopeless because these comments kept coming. And to be entirely honest with you, I had in my video a section of maybe 5 minutes where I talked about the Allegro, molto e vivace and how this didn't conflict with the outcome of that tempo marking, the metronome mark of that minuet in whole beat. But I just left it out because I thought the video was going to be too long. And also, it requires a little bit more background understanding and notation to really come to an understanding of why this not necessarily has to be a conflict. And so eventually I stopped answering the comments in this sense because I appreciate all of you in the comments. We are in this together, guys. I cannot emphasize this enough. Whether you support the idea of whole beat or not, as long as you act like normal people that talk to each other, to each other. It's all fine. But I gave up because I had the impression, and it's true for some people are just in the comment boxes to just disprove everything I say by focusing on a detail that's not the main point of the video and then enlarging that detail into a context that oftentimes they create themselves. But listen, guys, I'm not saying that that question that was raised is not important. I just misjudged how much emphasis you would actually put into that Italian tempo word. But let me start by saying this. All this confusion in the comment boxes is actually great because exactly that was the reason in the first place that metronome was invented and embraced by so many composers. We overlook that so much. The fact that this device, this stupid ticking device that is behind me there, so many people hate it because it was abused in piano classes and what have you. Like always going faster, 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 faster. Of course, if it's used like that, you're gonna hate it. But in those just early days of Beethoven, Salieri, all these composers, like Melzel, of course, was a brilliant marketeer, but also the composers wanted that because there was so much confusion. The notation addition, the Italian tempo words did not cover anymore this traditional concept of the tempo indications, of the tempo that tempi that the composers had in mind. And so there you had this device, and exactly that metronome mark is the most puzzling, not only to Bernstein, but also to you, because there is the conflict. There is the conflict. The way we play, I get it. You don't feel this Allegro, molto e vivace. It's like a very calm allegretto-like tempo. And that's the reason why I decided to make a follow-up video in which I will give you one of the craziest sources, one of the craziest texts ever written, probably in history. And you get it all for free. How does that sound? Applause for myself. Because let's face it, the most accurate way to determine, to fix a tempo is the metronome. There is no other way. Yes, you can play for a minute and then count the number of notes you play. We made also videos of that. There was a method also applied in the 19th century. But when you have a metronome mark that completely matches the tempo you have in mind, there is no better guarantee that as a composer you can sleep on both of your ears, because in future times, that's at least how people in the 19th century thought, and we have beautiful quotes. The book Fixing the Beethoven Mistake, that will give you over 100 quotes divided over a century, and you will read beautiful quotes like you can be assured that as long as the sun is actually and whatever, that tempo will be recognized and just be able to be repeated. Of course, that's so true. But still, and that's the first point I want to make, so many times, and we all do that, you hear a piece like that, you say, but I don't feel the Allegro molto. Okay, but that's secondary under the metronome mark. The metronome mark is there on top. What we feel in connection to a certain tempo description is not necessarily what the composer 200 years ago felt when seeing or writing that same tempo indication, the Italian tempo word. Fast and slow are no absolute terms, they are relative. But with the metronome, we don't have that problem. We have only two possibilities to read the metronome. Either we read historical metronome marks as we do it today, which is single beat, and then we have to accept a 19th century situation that we even can no longer reconstruct today without the application of digital tools. As for instance, in the video I made about Cazzare's Beethoven symphonies, the 19th century music lover would have just on a daily basis witnessed performances like this. Or we read the metronome in a pendulum way, in a whole beat way. The back and forth, the two ticks together form the beat, the metronome mark, the note value in the metronome mark, and then we arrive to a tempo like this. In fact, all the rest is redundant. I'm not saying not interesting, but it's not essential in order to reconstruct historical metronome marks. You have these two options. Option number one, the single beat metronomization reading, doesn't work. Not only in 0.01% of the cases, as someone wrote in the comment box. No, I would say like in 60% of the cases. I don't have, of course, an exact number, but we have a lot. We have tons of problems. When our metronome database will be finished later this year, early next year, you will be shocked when how many metronome marks you will find that make no sense at all, that go far beyond a threshold of what is within reach or what is to be considered to be reachable. But let's focus a little bit on that interesting part. Why does Beethoven in this first, or in this minuet of the first symphony, marks the tempo with Allegro, molto e vivace when the end result in our interpretation, in whole beat interpretation, is not like very fast? We don't feel that piece as very fast, right? It's so much related to a comment I get so many times. Whenever we play a piece of music that's written in presto that people say, but I don't feel the presto. Or when we play an Allegro or an Allegro molto piece, people say like, yeah, but you play it like an andante or an allegretto. And I hear you. But it's not that there is not a solution. First of all, we should be very, very careful, like I said before, in just judging or just thinking that what we feel, that what we connect to these Italian tempo words, fast, slow, slower, middle tempo, a little bit faster, a little bit slower, is exactly similar as to how people 2 centuries ago were feeling and thinking about that. And in a way, you don't have to take my word for that, but this idea that these tempo words still today reflect the same meaning, still have the same meaning as 200 years ago. You do find sources actually acknowledging that, and way before our time. For instance, I have here an edition of Mozart edition by Camille Saint-Saëns, who published this in 1915. So over 100 years ago, and he had to say this about these tempi. It's very interesting. It's exactly spot on, touching the topic we are talking about today. He says, life was more tranquil in the 18th century than it is today, and this had its influence on the music of the period. The rapidity of modern life was unknown, and this tendency often reveals itself in the too rapid rendering of the old masters, much to their detriment, however you pronounce that. With Mozart, the inclination to hurry, which is much too common, must be avoided. His presto corresponds with our allegro. His allegro with our allegro moderato. His adagios are extremely slow, as is proved by the number of notes sometimes written for 1 beat of the bar. You have more sources than this. We talked years ago about Charles-Marie Widor, the organist in France, who actually met the first violinist under Haydn, describing him when he was conducting this very old man, taking tempi twice as slow as they were customary in 1930-ish. And also he explained that the rapidity of tempi, like virtuosity and the speed of life and steam engines and electricity. So people were aware of this increase of tempo. But this quote by Saint-Saëns is super interesting because he says exactly the same. Whenever you see presto, don't think that was the same for Mozart. And I'm saying to you, whenever you see Allegro, molto e vivace, don't think it was the same for Beethoven. But still there is some intriguing elements there. Allegro, molto e vivace, in this minuet, again, it's not extremely fast. And for Beethoven, Allegro, molto e vivace was a pretty fast tempo. The easiest solution, and it's also the end solution to this problem, is, I will explain that, however, and we will bring that fascinating source that you need to understand what I'm going to say now. When you take the minuet tempo that we took in Beethoven's First Symphony, or Bernstein for that matter, took in what he called like the traditional minuet tempo, and you would tap the quarter notes go in an Allegro, molto e vivace tempo. If you disconnect the tempo feeling, almost I would say the character of the tempo, from the absolute tempo being quarter notes here, we are in a minuet tempo, which is a 3/4 beat movement. I explained that last week. The 3/4 notes, if you tap those, you would have very fast pulses. And that's the Allegro, molto e vivace. So Beethoven actually indicates the tempo almost to the beats. But that brings us to one of the most mysterious conflicts in writings that I've ever seen, and it is a text written by our trusted Carl Czerny. I mean, Czerny, we all know that. He was not particularly sloppy in what he described and the way he described it. Our story starts with Beethoven's Opus 31, number 1, the third movement. Here is a fragment from a very old recording Alberto Sanna made on the channel, still available. By the way, Alberto is in the middle of recording the first box of 3 boxes of, again, 10 CDs with the full Beethoven keyboard work. So everything covered around the sonatas chronologically, but also the variations and other works. Of course, everything in whole beat. But that will be a fascinating project. Already it is. Because the variations, many of these variations are just fantastic music. And so they're much lesser known. We know the big variations, the C minor variations, the Diabelli variations, maybe the later one, the very late variations, the huge work. But all the other variations are much less known, but they're fascinating music. And the great thing is when you combine them with the sonatas, you see the differences in style, but also the tempo conflict actually seemed to be incredible. Like the sonatas, we know that music, and when we play it in whole beat, many people will have the impression like it's so slow. But when you hear the variations in a similar tempo that you've never heard before, it seems to be so natural suddenly. So stay tuned for that project. There's also a link in the description box that leads you to our newsletter. There's no better way to not miss this whenever we release it as a Kickstarter than just to subscribe on that email list. But here's a fragment of that old recording. I know many will say like, but it's obviously too slow because we know, of course, I get it. But this is just a Czerny tempo in whole beat. It feels like a nice, smooth allegretto tempo. It's not too fast, it's very friendly. There seems to be nothing wrong with this, except that some of you may say like, okay, but there is an alla breve sign. That should be faster, right? Keep that in mind. But let's now see what our friend Carl Czerny had to say about this movement. It's just one sentence. He says, as the allegretto is an alla breve measure, the whole must be played remarkably quick allegro molto. So because this movement is in an allegretto tempo, this alla breve should be played in a remarkably quick allegro molto. And now what? You try to explain that to me. Did not only Beethoven make a mistake, but also Carl Czerny? Now, the book will have a 30-page chapter on notation, the relation of notation and note values, harmonies, and also, of course, we put there everything in connection to the metronome marks. We will give examples and what have you. All of that is necessary to fully understand what I'm about to say. But I will give you a short summary, so stick with me. First of all, in the beginning years of the metronome, there was a tendency, also started and actually pushed by Beethoven himself, to get rid of the Italian tempo words and to replace them 100% by metronome marks. That's important. How many times you hear or you read people say like Beethoven hated the metronome? No, he didn't. He embraced this machine until the end of his life. The question is if he succeeded in everything he wanted to do. In 1817 he wrote, and I'm paraphrasing, to his friend Meusel, that he wanted to abandon all Italian tempo words in favor of metronome marks. And he added to that, like, we have to keep Italian tempo marks or Italian tempo words because they describe a certain character of the piece. It's actually very similar to what Carl Czerny describes in his pianoforte school. When he talks about Allegro, he describes no less than 12 different characters that an Allegro can have. And so whenever we today speak about Italian tempo words, it's this direction still that we have. Like the Italian tempo words gives, like, there are tempo indications, but they give also the characters. We should feel something that's indicated or suggested by these tempo words. It's also what Melzel wanted when he published in 1821 his tempo scales. He also wanted to abandon Italian tempo words. Of course, he wanted to be the monopolist of tempo, and with no better way, we get rid of this traditionally developed like tempo words that like for a century on that time was developing, and then we replace everything by metronome marks. The question is if they succeeded in that. Of course, they pushed Beethoven and Czerny and probably other composers as well. But even Czerny, who described these 12 character tones or colors of an Allegro in his pianoforte school, you will find more than one explanation or description of an Italian tempo word, the tempo words, as an indications of the tempo of a piece, not the character. And now we come to a very interesting dilemma. When you have a metronome, it produces sticks. You connect that to Italian tempo words because they stayed on the same line. You had actually a kind of dual system. But you have a complex notation system. And one of the most complex issues in notation and history of notation is common time versus alla breve. I've made some videos about that. I will be very short here. You read things about that from the 18th century in France and even before. It's very clear, and I'm not inventing this. This is not my opinion. This is just a fact. And if you don't believe me, then I'm sorry. Then just go and read it for yourself. When you have common time, the normal notation there has 16th notes. When you have an alla breve, the pure alla breve, the old church alla breve has 8th notes. They were both used in Mozart's time and Beethoven's time, both. And that's a problem. Because the tempo relates as such. The alla breve 8th note, it doubles the tempo, but it halves the note value. In other words, when you double the tempo, but you halve the note value, your tempo is equal. You won't hear the difference. There is a difference in character, there's a difference in playing. The alla breve is much heavier, it's much more legato. The common time 16th notes are much more articulated, so there is a certain direction there already in the notation, but the tempo is the same. But what do you do with the metronome? How do you indicate that metronome mark? You could say like, but Melzel had a linear scale. The alla breve tempi were actually double of that. So on the scale of the metronome, they were already far at the edge. And you see where I'm getting to. So if you indicate an alla breve tempo, like for instance in this Opus 31 number 3, the piece we've just heard, the piano sonata, then on the metronome scale, that tempo is an Allegro molto. If you compare the beats the machine produced to the middle tempo, but in feeling, in character, we hear an allegretto. And that's what Czerny meant. In this allegretto, because it's an alla breve, you have to play it in a remarkably quick allegro molto. Which of the two would you give priority? I mean, you cannot. Czerny was not out of his mind. He knew what it was describing. It was exactly that. And it's confirmed in a weird way by our friend Anton Schindler. In another piece with a similar alla breve notation, Schindler writes, by making the measure alla breve, Beethoven obviously wished to announce the correct pace of this movement. When in an allegro tempo one beats 4 quarter notes rather than a thesis and arsis, the quick succession of the beats produces approximately an allegro assai. So also there, he says an allegro, actually you beat it as an allegro assai, because in the alla breve, you beat all the quarter notes, and it's exactly the same thing as happened with the allegretto of that piano sonata. And it's exactly the same thing as with the allegro molto e vivace in our trusted First Symphony minuet. The only thing is, Beethoven did make a mistake. Not in his opinion though, he marked the movement allegretto. He exactly applied what he wrote to Mösel. I will get rid of Italian tempo words as tempo indications, but I will replace them by metronome marks, and I will give the character. I will use the tempo indications as character. Allegretto is the character in this case. Again, I cannot go too much in detail. The book will go much more in detail in this, but it is the direction. Beethoven didn't win this battle. He had to come back on his terms. If you see later works, it is like he only did it a few times and he had to abandon that. And of course, Carl Czerny knew about that. Maybe not in a way that he was conscious about that, but for him it was an obvious thing to write an allegretto. You play it as an allegro molto. The minuet was still marked allegro molto, but the principle is the same. That's it. Straightforward, simple, as always. Solutions in tempo reconstruction should be simple. We like mysterious solutions. We prefer them, I think, as a musical society, even above the straightforward whole beat thing, you know. It's like, yeah, everything is solved. Yeah, but that's boring. I know, but it's simple like that. They should give me an international award for it. I know. But all jokes apart, that's how it works. And I think you asked for an explanation. I sometimes wish some people would write a question with a little bit more respect and say, how did you not talk about the Allegro? How come you didn't see that? I mean, I know, guys, I don't mind, but you know, that's the world we live in. We're all in this together. There's only one Beethoven. We have to share him, right? And at the end, you do really whatever you like with the music. We are not imposing anything. I do read that sometimes, and I understand it. I get it. It's not but people feel upset sometimes. You want us to play like that? I don't. But of course, I understand after so many years being on internet, I know what I write. They see the light, they see the logic. And there is this friction, like when we know that this is a solution to all the things that have been unsolved for so many years, 100 years of recording technology, I would say almost. I don't want to abandon my old Beethoven life because I like it, and that's fine. That's fine. I'm really sure we are heading into a period. Maybe will not witness that, but it will happen. This idea of whole beat is so simple. You change just one thing. You take 2 ticks for one, and everything changes. Well, that's so simple. That's so simple to explain. That's so logic. That makes so much sense that it will have an impact. It's unstoppable. When people are genuinely interested in reconstructing our historical musical past, then there is no other solution. So this will break through. But even then, I hope I will see it. I mean, I'm 52 right now, so I hope I still have some years to witness how this thing will evolve. But I can imagine that you will have a real mainstream performance practice, an evolved historical performance practice, because that it is. If you go to a concert today and you see Valentina Lisitsa play all the Beethoven sonatas, it's not unhistorical. I mean, it's a normal. In fact, that's more historical than what we do. What she's doing is just on this line of ever-evolving progress of art. It's what the people in the 19th century even applauded. They didn't want to go back. Yeah, you had some conservative voices, thankfully. Therefore, we know the things we know today. But that's just fine. If Beethoven would agree or not, I don't know. I cannot ask him. I think Beethoven would be very upset, but who knows? If Chopin would be fine, I don't know. Honestly, should we care about the opinion of the feelings of someone who's passed away for so many years? I would say yes, because I'm so grateful to Beethoven waking up each day at 5 a.m. and starting to compose, even if he felt like sick and terrible. But it's up to us to decide what we do with that. The only thing we do at this channel and in our research is to give you a direction of what it, I would say, most probably was like, and that's just a starting point, guys. Our symphonies that are now available, it's just a starting point for you. If you haven't bought them, like, what are you waiting for? We have now also streaming options on Bandcamp. You can listen to the symphonies 3 times there. They're now available if you want. Go there, and after 3 times, Bandcamp will ask you to support our work. And I would say that's absolutely normal, right? Because we worked over 4 years, and actually the total project is over 10 years. You just want to have that. It's unbelievable. The first shipments are out now. All shipments are out now for the first batch, and the persons, of course, in Belgium receiving those as first, and the reactions I get are just mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. And I knew it because it feels just that right. And then let's just enjoy Beethoven's music and think together about what the historical past, what his mind could, what he was thinking, and things like that. And this is just a piece of the puzzle, an important piece of the puzzle. You know all of that. Okay, that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching. We see each other very soon again. Bye.